After mixed results against a mixed batch of teams over the next couple of weeks, the Knicks face a tough stretch of games, two of the best in the West, the squad that eliminated them last year, and their rival across from the East River. Hello and welcome to the Putback with Ian Begley live. I'm Chris Williamson alongside SNY NBA insider Ian Begley. Joining us this afternoon is SNY contributor Ashley Nicole Moss, a regular fixture on Geico Sports Night, and Stefan Bondy, the Knicks reporter for the New York Daily News. We're live on SNY's Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube pages, as well as streaming on SNY.TV. As always, you can get involved in the comment section throughout this entire stream. But let's tip things off, Ian, with the baseline. And last night on Geico Sports Night, you took a few positives out of that Knicks loss to the Bulls. What were a couple good signs you saw from the team?
I think first off, Chris, with the Eastern Conference the way it is, you never obviously want to lose a game, but the Knicks were on second night of a back-to-back, so you cut them a little slack. But then you saw, I thought the offense, the starters in particular, show some life in that third quarter. You saw some pick and roll play between Kemba Walker and Julius Randle. You saw some rhythm between those two. And really, I thought the starters on Sunday night played the best that they had in the past 2 weeks because they really struggled with the rhythm on offense. Defensively, we thought they were going to take a step back. But, offensively, you assume that they were going to be a lot better than they have been. So maybe you take a little bit of solace in the idea that Julius Randle got going against Chicago, and really the starters, it looked like it flowed a little better last night. Yeah, hopefully that energizes the team and is infectious, for the rest of the guys, because we still need Barrett to, step up his game. Obviously, Evan Fournier as well. And Stefan, the Knicks have pretty much alternated wins and losses over the last month. They haven't won consecutive games since the end of October. What do you see, or what do you really point to as the main reason for that significant inconsistency?
I mean, the starting group. I mean, that's it. They just haven't played well. And I mean, the bar is so low. Ian's talking about they played well last night. I mean, Evan Fournier did not play well.
Right.
Walker played well for like 5 minutes in the third quarter. RJ Barrett did not play well. As a group, they did not play well to start the game. So when you have a group that's consistently in the negative, we're talking about ratings and analytics and all that stuff. Everything is in the negative. It leads to consistency throughout the rotations, and you just can't get a groove going. And that's I mean, for me, that's the reason why they've been so inconsistent is the starting unit.
And because of that starting unit, Ashley, we've seen being struggling so much. We've seen a lot of big calls on Twitter for Tom Thibodeau to shake up that starting lineup and see some different guys towards the end of the game. Do you think it's time right now for some change in that starting five?
I think there's no time like the present, right? I think that when you're in a situation where you're seeing this very up and down type of play and it's very inconsistent, you have to go ahead and formulate good habits when you still have the time to, because as the season continues to progress, it only gets harder. After that All-Star break, the playoff picture really starts to formulate game by game, and then you can't make those adjustments. It's not a light switch. You can't just turn it on and turn it off and become a different team when you want to, and then revert back to old ways when you don't want to. You got to go ahead and formulate those good habits rather, and get rid of all the bad ones. And I think Tibbs, is a creature of habit. He likes to go in with a game plan. He wants to make that game plan work by any means necessary. But sometimes the writing's on the wall, or in this case, on the court. And if it's not working, it's not working. It doesn't mean you're a bad coach. It doesn't mean you don't have the right set of guys. It's just about formulating the right chemistry between them on that court to put them in the position to win. It's all about winning games in the National Basketball Association. And look, the East is not, the East of the past. This is not, the little brother of the NBA. The East is a lot more competitive than we've ever seen it. And in order to compete, you have to go ahead and be able to adjust. And Tibbs has to do that.
Yeah, and one of the things that I find interesting about that is how he's been, as great of a coach as he is, Tibbs, his pride, I think, sometimes gets in the way of making the right decisions, as you said, to get that better chemistry in that flow with the starting unit, mix it up. And going off of that, Stefan, you put up a poll on Twitter throwing out some potential lineup adjustments for the Knicks. Manuel quickly at the 1 or 2, as well as Alec Burks subbing in for Evan Fournier, poll pretty high. Derrick Rose for Kemba Walker got a lower percentage, but still was an option. So out of those 3 options, which do you think is more likely to occur?
Well, you touched on it, and I'm going to preface it with this. Tom Thibodeau has been hesitant to make any changes. We saw it last year with Elfrid Payton, right? I mean, how long were we waiting for Elfrid Payton to get out of the lineup? And finally, it was like it forced his hand because he was only playing 6 minutes to start. Never played again. With that being said, I think me personally, I would choose Alec Burks in the lineup instead of Evan Fournier. I think that can get Evan Fournier going on the flip side on the with the second unit. I think he'd do well with how fast the second unit plays. I think that would be the move I would do. I could also see Tom Thibodeau just going with his guy Derrick Rose instead of Kemba Walker. There probably some politics involved with that. You know, Kemba's a former All-Star. You know, not too far removed from being an All-Star. Everybody tells me he's a great guy. Ian knows him better than me, having played him, having covered time. I don't know how he'd personally take a move like that. I don't see Emmanuel quickly coming into the starting lineup. I think he's good where he is simply because he's a streaky player. And he's good in that role. Hey, microwave off the bench. If you got to go and let him play, let him keep going. And if you don't, you pull him out. So, you know, that's how I kind of see that situation.
It's interesting, Steph, because, you know, obviously these guys, when we talk to them after games, they've been saying the right things. They've been remaining positive. They've been saying, yeah, I haven't played well. They put it on themselves, but we're going to get better. We feel good about it. But I know privately, a couple of the top players have expressed some frustration about the way things play out on the offensive end. And this was probably a couple of weeks ago, maybe a little bit more recently, but it's been ongoing early on in the season as the starters have struggled. There's been frustration expressed. And I wonder if that would play into, or if it plays into at all, how Tom Thibodeau manages this starting unit. Remember, you know, the Knicks bring in Kemba Walker and Evan Fournier as their top moves in this offseason. And then when those two are not playing in fourth quarters, I mean, it makes you wonder about these offseason moves and how the bigger picture kind of fits together. Julius Randle hasn't been Julius Randle. Do they figure it out? Does Tom Thibodeau give them more time to figure it out? You mentioned the numbers before. You know, I just wonder if things kind of go sideways, don't go well over these next 2 weeks. At what point does Tom Thibodeau look to change things up?
Yeah, you mentioned they're saying it privately. I mean, Evan Fournier said it publicly when he's talking about the offense is stagnant. I mean, he let it known he's not happy with the way this team and this offense is going. So I see what you're saying there.
Yeah, look, at the end of the day, players want to win, right? And if you've ever played a sport, whether at the highest level or peewee level, you go out there and you want to compete, you want to win. Nobody plays sports, competitive sports, to just lose every single game. So the players can only do so much. It's also up to the coach to hold his guys accountable, but it's also up to the coach to go ahead and put them in the position they need to succeed. And I think at the root, the foundation of every single player, yes, there's egos, and, you know, somebody's a starter, doesn't want to be taken out, you know, out of that starting unit. Things like that. I completely understand that. But I think at the root of this group of guys really just wants to win, and they want to win by any means necessary. And if that's the philosophy that you have, and that's the ideology that you live on, great. But you also have to go ahead and be able to deal with what comes with that. And that may be, you know, that may include being removed from the starting lineup, just because that's for the betterment of the team. So I hope that the guys who are not happy with the way that the starting unit has played offensively, you know, they stick with that concept and they do what's good for the betterment of the team. And that may be moving you out of that starting five. And if you're okay with that, I'm here for that. I think that at the end of the day, it's all about what makes the team win. And it's all about winning games and going into the playoffs and being a successful team.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's a bad look, though, if you got a $78 million signing and he can't start anymore. You know what I mean? I'm talking about Evan Fournier. And right. I get it. It's just the optics of it aren't that good.
Right. No, that makes total sense, because you're like, why are you paying this guy that amount of money and he's coming off the bench? It just doesn't add up, you know, from a financial perspective when you talk about the investment. And Sherwin M is on YouTube saying, or Twitter, the Knicks wish they had a player like Elfrid Payton on the roster today. I don't know about that. But that is the total about face from Knicks Twitter, because last year they roasted that man to another level. And once again, you can write your questions into the comment section, no matter what platform you're watching on. We're going to get to them throughout the show. And Ashley, speaking of players that are struggling, not just Evan Fournier, but RJ Barrett, over the first 9 games of the season, he was averaging 19.2 points per game. Over his last 8, though, he's only averaged a tick over 10 points. Let's give you a panic meter from 1 to 5. 1 being you're really not that concerned at all. 5 being you're freaking out. Where does RJ fall on the panic meter right now in your eyes?
It's like a 2-3, just because we've kind of seen this up and down from RJ Barrett before. He goes through these cycles where he plays really, really well for a chunk of games, then he drops, and then he goes back and he plays really, really well. The thing I love about RJ, and Nick's Twitter will say, that's because you have a love affair with RJ Barrett. I kind of do. I'm a big fan of RJ, always have been. He has this ability that's so wise beyond his years to affect a game in the way that he can in that moment until he can get back into the swing of things. So if you watch, if he's not shooting well, he's a beast on defense. If he's not playing well defensively, he's out there scoring. If he's not out there scoring, he's assisting. RJ knows in each and every game where he can benefit based on how he's playing that day. But also we forget RJ is so young, and it seems like he's been part of this franchise forever. It hasn't been forever. And when you see guys this young, they're still coming into their own as players. They're still trying to figure out what their strong suits are. They're still trying to figure out what their weaknesses are and how to kind of live in between on the games where, that happens. And I think it's not, a cause to hit the panic button. This is just the growing pains of a young player. But one thing RJ is a hard worker, and we've seen that season to season. He consistently gets better, and I think that's a trajectory that's only going to continue. And I think RJ will be just fine. It's just the growing pains of being a 21-year-old superstar. It really is.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. Is he a superstar though? You can't put him in that category.
He's a 21-year-old superstar in the making. How's that, Chris? Leave my RJ alone.
Look, yo.
Wow.
Y'all
I don't know about superstar.
Yeah, superstar.
That's bold.
He's
got faith in RJ.
Superstar in the making. How's that?
Here's always been my take. Always been my take on RJ. He's good at everything, but he's not great at anything.
Yes. I totally agree.
That separates him from the Ja Morants of the world, who he's great at some things. So I don't think he can take it to that superstar level.
Yeah.
But we don't. This is the only thing with that take is when people say, because we hear it a lot, right? Especially throughout Knicks Twitter, we hear this a lot. I think it's too soon to make that assessment on RJ if he's ever going to reach super. He's only 21 years old. Not everyone comes into the league and they're LeBron James, D Wade, Michael Jordan. Like, that's very rare that you have a guy that you could say he's going to be one of the greats. He's still young. The jury's still out. We don't know what kind of player he'll be when he's 23, when he's 25, when he's 29. There's still a lot of strides for him to make in his career to go ahead and say he's never going to be a superstar. We don't know that.
Yeah, but this is ceiling.
I think he's going to make steady progress year in and year out. I think that based on how he approaches his craft. But I think the Knicks have to kind of look into the future here with RJ Barrett, because they're going to be up for a contract extension with him going into next summer. And if you're looking at a bigger picture approach here, is RJ Barrett, if you think he's going to be a superstar, then you construct your roster that way. But if they don't have that same read, then the next moves that they make are going to be with RJ being a number 2 or number 3. So I get that you want to wait and you want to see how he develops, but you also, if you're the Knicks, you have to have a good read on where he's going to be 3, 4, 5 years from now, because that influences your decisions today and next summer.
Right.
Ian, let me ask you this though. Is it fair to judge him and Julius just don't play well together? I mean, I think that we've kind of seen it's very rare that they both have good games at the same time. Is it a matter of you have to see what one looks like without the other to make that assessment? Because at the end of the day, it may be Julius who may be the catalyst for everyone around him not playing well consistently.
You bring up a good point about Julius and RJ. They obviously didn't play together well. Year one, I thought last year, RJ had some good games playing off of Julius. And that kind of leads to the idea that this year, things are not going through Julius Randle every possession. And I think Julius Randle needs to adjust to that. RJ Barrett needs to adjust to that. Kemba Walker and Evan Fournier need to adjust to that. I think that's part of the issue with the starters in this offense. It's such a different offense than last year when Randle was able to create off the dribble, had the ball in his hands a ton. So that's the adjustment you're seeing now. But I think that in general, you can have RJ and Julius play well together. It's just about the other 3 guys on the court and the style that you're playing.
Yeah. And going off of that, and what have any evaluators said about RJ's game in the recent days, or have they been pretty even keeled?
Yeah, I haven't checked in with anybody specifically on RJ the last couple of days, but prior to that, he was coming off that hot shooting stretch, and a couple scouts were saying that, look, he's just he's feeling the game very well. He's taking guys off the dribble. He's taking his opportunities in pick and roll very well. He's changing speeds. He's not, it's not just bully ball every time down the lane. Now, this was before his shot fell off the face of the earth. And so I would imagine that the comments would be more geared towards that now. But with Barrett, I think one thing that's remained consistent is when he's running the break, and one scout mentioned this a couple weeks ago, when he's on the break, he's got his head down and he's not picking his head up. He's not looking to distribute the ball. He's going straight to the rim, regardless of how many defenders are in front of him or are running with him. And the scout mentioned that that's something that they'd like to see RJ adjust moving forward.
Yeah, and be sure to always check out SNY.TV for our tremendous Knicks coverage. A full recap of Tom Thibodeau's comments from last night are there, as well as more on Ian's report on the frustration among certain players regarding the offense. All right, look, yo, so we're supposed to start the Rose Garden segment right now. I'm going to give some flowers to a player or aspect of the team that might be floating under the radar. And who I have this week, Ian, is going to be Nerlens Noel. I really like how he played in that game against the Rockets. For all the things that went wrong and how bad they looked, he provided a lot more stability, in the paint. Obviously, he's not going to be somebody who's going to give you 10, 15 points, but when it comes to rebounding, defensive, shot, blocking shots, he did a really good job. And then in the Bulls game, it was just a matter of staying on the floor, because he got called for some ticky-tacky fouls in that game. So he wasn't able to stay on the floor when he did. But I think that he needs a lot more respect, especially because, remember, Mitchell Robinson, his injury issues, Taj Gibson, there's going to be a lot more pressure on Nerlens Noel to deliver until Mitchell Robinson and Taj Gibson get back. And Stefan, the Knicks have struggled to keep centers healthy between Noel, Taj Gibson, and Mitchell Robinson. Considering how defensive-oriented Tibbs likes his team, how much could this be an issue moving forward?
Well, I mean, it's an issue, and this is why, specifically regarding Mitchell Robinson, this is why I wasn't the biggest fan of him putting on all that weight in the offseason, because, I mean, he was dealing with a broken foot. And he's already shown he's been a little bit injury prone. And so to put on this extra weight, to me, wasn't a good idea. And Thibodeau, listen, part of the deal with Thibodeau and the centers is basically you're sitting there under the basket, you're going to rim protect, and whoever comes in the lane, you're going to absorb that contact. That's going to lead to a lot of injuries, right? And we're seeing that with Nerlens Noel. We're seeing that with Mitchell Robinson. And Thibodeau, last season, the same kind of thing happened. He brought in some guys on 10-day contracts. I think they're going to be able to use some patchwork and get guys in there. So he's going to find ways to plug holes. But this is going to be a big issue throughout the season, just simply because these guys haven't been able to stay on the court, haven't been able to stay healthy. And Mitchell Robinson, I see it in his game, really. I don't think it's the weight. I think it's just he's so banged up. He doesn't have the explosiveness that he had in years 1 and 2. So this might be a big issue, not only for the rest of this season, but moving forward, and you look to evaluate Mitchell Robinson and whether to sign him in the offseason when he's a free agent.
Right.
Steph, that trade deadline coming up for Mitchell Robinson is going to be big. The Knicks are going to have to make a decision. If you don't trade him, you say to yourself, all right, I'm going to try to commit to him long-term as a free agent. The answer has to be one or the other, though, because we've seen it in the past with the Knicks where they don't trade Frank Ntilikina and they don't get anything back for him. You don't want that to happen with Mitchell Robinson if you're the Knicks.
Well, what's his trade value right now?
It ain't that high.
Can't be high. Can't be high. But it's either that or get nothing back.
Yeah. And Ashley, we have a comment on Twitter from the Cooler. Is the honeymoon over for Leon Rose? The roster is poorly constructed, especially at center and point guard, built around guys who are always hurt. Is that a fair assessment in your mind?
I don't know if the honeymoon phase is over. I think, you never know if a player's injury prone until he's out there in the trenches, right? And this was a critique I had of Mitchell Robinson. I think that, one, the way he plays gives me anxiety. He just plays very rough, very tough. And every time he hits the floor, you're holding your breath to see if he's going to get up. He's just one of those players. But I think also, you know, in the NBA, unfortunately, you can be the best player on the court. Not saying that that's Mitchell Robinson, but just in general. But if you're never available, then what does it mean? You know, in the NBA, your best asset is your availability. And this was a conversation that we had about Frank a lot throughout the seasons of him being with the Knicks, is that, yeah, you have all these things that you can bring to a team, but we can never utilize them, at least not consistently or predominantly throughout a season. It's very sporadic. And I think with Mitch, you know, there's a lot of potential there. I think he's a guy who plays with a lot of heart. He wants to be there. He wants to win. He wants to compete, but his body has other ideas. And sometimes you need to go ahead and reach the fork in the road and say, look, you're a really great guy, but I can never really utilize you when I need you. If you look at the series against Atlanta, that would have been a different series had you had Mitchell Robinson there, but he was hurt. So you have to go ahead and look, do you want to take a gamble on somebody who's kind of already shown you what you can expect, what that future is going to look like? Or do you want to go ahead and save yourself before you get too deep and make the changes that need to be made? It's a tough conversation, right? Because guys, you know, they develop camaraderie, you like guys, you become a family, but at the end of the day, basketball is a business and you have to make business decisions that are for the betterment of the team. And Mitchell Robinson may not be the asset that the front office thought he was when they brought him in.
Yeah, no, he may not be, because, you know, you can have all the potential in the world. We talk about so many guys, but if they don't realize it, or if they're not on the floor to be able to, you know, maximize it, then it means absolutely nothing, because this is a business about winning. And that's the only thing, except the, you know, outside of the bottom line for the GMs and the owners. But Ian, I want to get to you next about, we have a comment from Taco Nacho. He's saying, if this continues, can we see the Knicks try to make a big trade, or do you see them being more patient?
Yeah, I think that they've kind of planted their flag in terms of free agency over the next couple of summers, because they gave Evan Fournier that money with the extra year. So he's here for at least 3 years. Kemba Walker's here for at least 2 years. And so these guys are, you know, are going to be under contract this summer and potentially next summer. So you're looking at the trade market, which I think is the correct route for them. And my question is, who's going to be available and what can the Knicks give up asset wise in such a trade? If you're talking about, you know, a big name like a Karl Anthony Towns, you know, you're going to have to give up the stars, the moon, and the sun to get Karl Anthony Towns here. And then after that trade, what do you have left? What's left on the roster? Is it enough to compete? I see the same thing with Damian Lillard. Like, if you're going to get Damian Lillard, you're going to give up an RJ Barrett, several first-round picks, probably Emmanuel quickly. You start there. And so you're giving up a lot. Do you have enough coming back? To me, it only makes sense to do that if you know getting a Lillard or a Towns or a player like that gets you somebody else, whether it's a future free agent or in another trade, you can get somebody else in the Garden, because to me, the roster might be too thin to compete after a trade like that.
Yeah, those are all very, very valid points. And Ian, a very serious question here. Which do you prefer, tacos or nachos?
I'm a taco guy, and I actually want to hear from Ashley on this. I know she's very upset about the Cowboys and the Knicks yesterday. It's a tough day for her. But Ashley, if there was one player on your wish list that the Knicks could acquire via trade, who would it be? Who would you give up for that player? And how would you project the roster going forward?
Oh God. I've been on the Damian Lillard train for a while. The only thing is I'm not willing to part with RJ Barrett for him, so I don't know how that would work.
Lord, what is going?
I think that Dame, you know, with some of the pieces that we have, I think this is a team that could really, really, you know, shake the room, you know, for lack of a better term. I just think that, you know, first of all, he needs to get out of Portland. Like, if he wants to win, Dame, I think you are the most loyal guy in the NBA. Nobody will ever question your loyalty from this point, from the past. And future basketball fans can never say Dame Lillard did not try to give Portland all that he had, but you got to let it go. It's not going to work. It's not going to happen. If he comes to New York, there will be statues built in his honor when he wins us a chip. I am certain of it. I believe in it. I think that you would have to unload a lot. I would unload everybody but RJ Barrett and Emmanuel quickly if I could.
Julius, you wouldn't. So You're not unloading Julius?
I would unload.
Or you would unload. But
I wouldn't unload if I could try to keep as many of my young guys as possible, I would keep them, because you got to remember Damian Lillard is, 30 something years old. He's not going to be playing in the league forever. The young guys, I believe, are the future of this team. I think there's a lot of promise there. We've already seen substantial second year strides from Quickly and Toppin. I would go ahead and unload as many of those bigger names as I could to get Damian Lillard. Absolutely.
Well, you're going to have to, there's going to be competition.
I know.
Yeah.
He doesn't have a lot of leverage because he's got so many years left on his contract. So even if he was like, all right, send me to New York. That's the only team I want to go to. The Blazers don't have to listen to that. And there's going to be a lot of teams trying to trade for him. So it would cost a lot, including RJ Barrett.
Yeah.
He asked me my dream trade.
I know, but that just ain't that ain't reality though. You know what I'm saying?
And I want to talk about something you had said earlier about whether the honeymoon period is off with this front office. I think it is. I mean, listen, they had more cap space than any other team going into last summer, right? And their job was to upgrade this roster. I mean, when you have those kind of assets, when you have the draft picks and when you have the cap space, and then you get two players in Kemba Walker and Evan Fournier who actually made the starting lineup worse. I think now it's time to start saying, hey, what are these guys doing? And, they need to upgrade this roster in a better way.
Yeah. I mean, that it's funny you say that, Stefan, because a lot of Knicks fans have been, and I think the ownership GMs have been preaching, patience, because it doesn't happen overnight, to turn into a championship contender. But you're right. You spend the amount of money, you had all that money, and this is what the product that you're putting on the floor, something's got to give, because you can't just keep saying, like Tip says the other day to Ian's question, okay, 10 games, so you see how far the starting unit can gel, then 20 games, and then next thing you know, the season is over. So a lot of interesting things to consider here. And you can be sure to watch Geico Sports Night all night, every night, starting at 11 on SNY. The show has plenty of Knicks news, sound, and discussion throughout the week, plus highlights and post-game reaction following every single game. We'll have full coverage of Tuesday's Lakers game, so be sure to watch all night, every night, starting at 11. And Ian, since we're on the topic of the Lakers game, the Knicks have a very tough grind over the next few games with the Lakers, the Suns, the Hawks, and the Nets. What are a couple progress points the Knicks need to make in order to win these games?
I mean, you look at the starters on offense, I think it starts there. It starts the first quarters, third quarters, and even into second quarters, the Knicks have been struggling. So you need better play from the starters. But to me, Chris, this is so pivotal because, I'll refer back to that frustration. Steph said it. Evan Fournier expressed it publicly. It was expressed privately by a couple other guys. I don't know that this is a group that can withstand a really rocky 2-week stretch where you're falling a few games under 500 and you're not playing competitively night in and night out. I don't know if the locker room can withstand that. To me, that's a big test, and that's why this is a pivotal stretch for the season. But as far as a few points of emphasis, obviously you're looking at the starters. You're looking at Kemba Walker, Julius Randle, chemistry there. And then defensively, how much does Nerlens Noel help you, and when do you get Mitchell Robinson back?
Yeah, and out of those 4 games, Stefan, which of those is most interesting to you to see where the Knicks are actually going to stack up?
I mean, I always love LeBron coming to the Garden. Now, I don't know if he's going to play after what happened with Isaiah Stewart, but every time LeBron comes to the Garden, it's something happens. I remember when he tried to punk Frank Ntilikina, and then Ennis tried to do his face. That was fun. So every time, and then Mara Hazonia blocked him to win the game. So that was So I always look forward to LeBron James coming into the Garden. So, even though what happened with Isaiah Stewart might prevent that from happening, I'd like to see. I always love to see him come to the Garden, how the Knicks might react.
Yeah, it's always a show, and they get geared up for one of the best players to ever lace him up on the court. And Ashley, speaking of LeBron, if he actually is suspended Tuesday, how much could that improve the Knicks' chance of winning?
Not much. I mean, not the way that the Knicks have been playing. I don't think it really makes or breaks it because, the Lakers are still, although, they're topsy-turvy, they're up and down playing style, would speak a different storyline. That's still a really good basketball team. You still have a lot of talent on that team. I think the Knicks, it's not about for them not having the depth to compete. It's not being able to execute for 4 quarters of basketball. We see this happen consistently. It's a third quarter of doom. And that's what, you're worried about, is that you get yourself in a ditch so deep that you can't dig yourself out of in enough time when the fourth quarter comes around. And if this was a team that is consistent through and through and powers through, those trials and tribulations that happen with any basketball game, I would say, yeah, the chances are really, really good, especially Julius. He comes from the Lakers. He knows that system. He knows some of those guys, but we've seen, them play with their food in games like Houston. You can't do that with the Lakers, because LeBron or no LeBron, that's still a team that will go ahead and strike while you're down. So I don't know. I think the bad habits is what makes you look at that kind of sideways, like LeBron or no LeBron. I don't know if it makes a drastic difference. It definitely will make it more competitive if LeBron is not on the floor. Absolutely. But I don't know if it's going to be a cakewalk and an easy win for them by any means.
Yeah.
Come on, Ashley. You're saying LeBron doesn't make a difference?
No, I'm saying LeBron makes a huge difference, but I'm saying if you take him out of the equation, I don't think that it makes a big difference for the Knicks. I still think that is going to be a tough game for them, just because they have extremely bad habits that we've seen time and time again.
Yeah, no, that's fair. Obviously, because here's the thing. The Lakers, they have all the talent. They're obviously going to be fired up to play at Madison Square Garden. And they have, some of the best players, top 20, top 30 players with AD, Carmelo, Russ, you name it. So, yeah, it's still going to be tough either way, whether LeBron plays.
Not to mention, we also do not play well at home for some reason. And we have a very weird home court situation going on. And we've seen us play with our food with teams that we should have blown out by 20. Hello, Houston. So I'm not that confident, whether LeBron is there or not, that we have a chance in this game. That's just me being honest.
Yeah, don't forget Ricky Rubio. He had the game of his freaking life. He feels like he's 40 years old and he's cooking up the Knicks, with the Cavaliers. But I have a comment for you, Ashley, from Gotta Be Legend. They say Knicks got a trade for Ashley. So I guess they're not too happy right there. I guess. I mean, she's already on the Knicks bandwagon. So that's funny. But Ian, over the next.
I'm not on the bandwagon. I've been a Knicks fan since '93.
No, that's not bandwagon. You know what I meant? Like, you've been down, with the Knicks. So I'm like, she's already there. But Ian, over this next 4-game stretch, who is a player you like to see step up the most besides Mr. Randall?
Okay, I was going to go Randall, because I was going to say that he always gets up to play the Lakers because of what happened in LA with them drafting him, and then him going to New Orleans, them letting him go. So that's just one thing for tomorrow night. But I would say too, that you're looking at, and to me, he doesn't need to step up. He just needs to keep doing what he's doing. Nerlens Noel. I think Nerlens Noel really makes an impact on defense. You've seen it the last couple games, rim protection, defending in the pick and roll. So if he's healthy and he can give the Knicks significant minutes, I think that really helps them on defense. It's just a matter of his health. You don't know when Mitchell Robinson's coming back. So I'm keeping an eye on Nerlens Noel over this next week and the impact he can make defensively.
Yeah, and he definitely's got to be disciplined, on the defensive end, making sure he doesn't pick up a lot of fouls, especially given the fact that they are thin at the center position. But that's going to do it for this week's edition of the Putback with Ian Begley. Our thanks to Ashley Nicole Moss. Check her out on Geico Sports Night, as well as Sports Illustrated. And thanks to Stefan Bondy. Be sure to follow his Knicks coverage with the New York Daily News. The next live Putback is Wednesday, December 1st, following this tough stretch, the morning after the Knicks and Nets clash for the first time. So you're going to want to check that out for sure. For Ian Begley, I'm Chris Williamson. We'll see you next week.